talking so that they don't hear us on. We're excited today to have Melanie Davis join us. She's with the Center for Conservation Biology at UC Riverside, and she works on monitoring rare plant populations and vegetation, for the multiple species habitat conservation plan. And she'll tell you a little bit more about herself and some of what the Center for Conservation Biology does in this program. And so today she's going to be talking to us about how climate change may be affecting the range and the shifts in these plant populations, this rare plant. So welcome, Melanie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arlene. And thank you, Riverside, San Bernardino CNPS, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's beautiful outside, so thanks for listening to my talk inside today. So I'll be talking to you about our work at the Center for Conservation Biology on Orocopia sage, or Salvia greatae. My talk is titled Documenting Range Extensions and Population Decline in a Rare Desert Sage. It's going to be a little bit of natural history, a little bit of research results, and some other fun little questions about the range and this plant. So thanks for being with us today. So I am a field botanist with UCR in the Center for Conservation Biology. We're based in Palm Desert. I live in Joshua Tree. My work with CCB has brought me to remote corners of the California desert. And as Arlie said, we study rare plant distribution, native vegetation distribution, and survey the effects of human disturbance and climate change on delicate desert ecosystems. As a lab, we are dedicated to the conservation and restoration of these ecosystems. It's an important part of our mission to incorporate science and community resilience into environmental education, and employ a crew of diverse backgrounds and research fields to get this done. So my co-authors on this research are in the black squares here, Dr. Lynn Sweet, Dr. Cameron Barrows, and Scott Hecox. But these are other members of our lab who have contributed to a lot of the work that we do currently. So first up, I want to acknowledge that the region that I'm going to be talking about today in the Southern California desert, in the Orocopia Mountains, is the traditional territory and homelands of the Cahuilla tribal bands and used by the Cocopah and Southern Paiute peoples. Currently, this area is under the management jurisdiction of the Bureau of Land Management, and it continues to be stewarded and advocated for by local tribes, especially under the new Chuckwalla National Monument designation. I also want to talk about how I'm framing knowledge and discoveries that I'm presenting today in this research. When I talk about things that we have found, I'm talking about things that are new specifically to Western science. The people of this land have intimate knowledge of the ecology and diversity, some of which is lost, and some of which has been shared. So thank you for that as well. So our subject in question, Orocopia sage. This is a member of the mint family, as one would expect, the genus Salvia. It was first described to Western science in 1906. It's about, in some areas, about a meter tall shrub, and it can get a little smaller, about half a meter tall. Dense branching white stems. It's seasonally deciduous based off of water availability. So in really dry seasons, it will lose its leaves. But if you have an overall wet year, it can retain those leaves as well. The flowers are very, very small. I put this kind of grubby photo of my hand in there to show you how small they are. And lavender. And they have that sort of opposite branching as typical of most sages. And importantly, it is endemic to a very small range in the Orocopia Mountains and Chocolate Mountains and a little bit in the Mecca Hills. So we're talking about the Colorado Sonoran Desert, primarily Riverside County, and a little bit into Imperial County, so eastern Riverside County. And original descriptions of this plant describe its habitat as being bajadas and arroyos and washes in the mid to low elevations of this range. So current protections for this plant, it's not listed federally or state. It is protected under the Coachella Valley Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, which is a conservation plan that targets species that are under threat from anthropogenic effects in the Coachella Valley and their habitats, of course. And it's considered a rare plant by CNPS. It's a 1B3, so that's threatened or endangered and endemic to California. And it has a state and global rank of 3. So although it's not state or federally listed, it does have local protections in the county, in the cities, and in the state. So a little bit about where it occurs. As I said, it's endemic to the Orocopia and Chocolate Mountains. I don't know if y'all can see you can see my mouse here. So here is the Orocopia Mountains right here. We have the Chocolate Mountains here, which this is under the current, this is all land managed by the U.S. Army Corps. So we were not able to access those areas. And then you have the Mecca Hills here. So of course, this is all just north of the Salton Sea. This is the Joshua Tree National Park. I-10 goes through here, Palm Springs, and then we're out here in Riverside, way in that corner. This is a view of Orocopia Mountain. I was lucky enough to snag a seat on one of the eco flights for the monument. There was an empty seat that they invited me on, so I got to see the mountain from not too far up, as opposed to like a commercial jetliner. And then this is a view looking from the peak of the Orocopia Mountains to the Salton Sea. So you can see it's a pretty dry, rugged area, very difficult to access. It's mostly under wilderness, which means that there's very few roads that you can legally drive a vehicle on to access these mountains. That'll play a role a little bit when I talk about what we find. But here's some other inhabitants of the mountains that you can find too. It's very typical of the Colorado Sonoran Desert. So this is the portion of the Sonoran that's west of the Colorado River in California. It experiences about 3 inches of rain per year. So it's incredibly dry. Monsoons can happen and are relatively typical, definitely typical of the Sonoran Desert, but they're quite a bit more rare than, say, like the Arizona Sonoran or what you would imagine of that area. Summer daytime temperatures average around 105 degrees and can easily reach up to 120. And importantly, there's very, very few instances of freezing in the winter. So this area stays warm pretty much year round. So due to the extreme climate of this region, these species have adapted over millennia to fill these niches. So you can find quite a few rare plants out here, and there's astounding biodiversity in this extremely rugged and extreme climate area. So we have our Orocopia mountain spurge. This is Euphorbia yeageri, which is a 1B1, which is very sweet and narrow endemic spurge, if you're into spurges, as well as Tetracoccus hollii, which is another shrubby spurge. And this is more of a bush that occurs up in the southern edges of Joshua Tree National Park as well. And Ziziphus obtusifolia, not considered a rare plant, but very limited in California. And then, of course, I had to put some ghost flower in there. It is home to bighorn sheep. Not all of them are dead. It was a pretty incredible thing to see in the field. Yeah, so it's well known and documented that deserts are one of the most sensitive bioregions, especially as temperatures increase with climate change. So endemic species with these really narrow ranges are surviving on the brink here. And a seemingly small mean temperature change can drastically alter any viable habitat. So as I mentioned, the Orocopia sage is protected under the local government multiple species habitat conservation plan. And so at CCB, we work closely with the Conservation Commission to monitor species that are protected under this. We also monitor some federally endangered species, the lizard and the plant, the fringe-tailed lizard and the Coachella Valley milkvetch, as well as a host of other, some insects and mammals as well. And so when I was first hired in 2019, it was about time to do another round of monitoring of Orocopia sage. So CCB at the time, now our primary investigator is Dr. Lynn Sweet. At the time, it was under Dr. Cameron Barrows. They had surveyed the distribution of this plant in 2002 and 2014. So when I started in 2019, I was tasked with doing a third set of surveys for this species. And then again in 2023, we did another round. So I'm sort of going to break it up by our 2019 field season or our 2023 field season and what we found on those two different sets. So our objectives when we were tasked to do this in 2019 was to first try and understand what the populations are doing and if there's any fluctuations in populations within the conservation areas. We wanted to monitor intensity of human disturbance or even presence of it. This area is extremely rugged, right? So develop isn't so much of a threat out here. There is some OHV activity, especially in the washes where this plant occurs. So off-roading, but it's pretty rarely visited by humans. And we wanted to sort of refine these range estimates, so sort of get a better idea of what the range of this plant looks like right now in this decade. And we wanted to implement and use hypothesis-driven, repeatable methodology for long-term studies. So making sure we have a baseline for this year, 2019, that we can repeat in future years to see how things change. So what did we do first? Figure out where the plants are. We knew where they were from our 2002 and our 2014 studies, but I wanted to create like a big data set of everywhere where we could possibly find Orocopia sage. So I did what any good California botanist would do, and I went on CapFlora and downloaded all those points. I went on iNaturalist and got every point I could that community members had observed. I used the California Natural Diversity Database, CNDDB, and GBIF. And then I started talking to people that had any experience in those mountains that I knew, and what their thoughts about where Orocopia sage would be. So this is an email that I had with Andy Sanders, who's the curator at the UCR Herbarium. And he said, I've been telling people for years, based off of Kurt Nice's observations, who had said he had seen plants near the crest of the range, but he never took coordinates, he never documented it, and he never submitted a specimen. So this was just word of mouth. So he said, I've been telling people for years that the place to look for Salvia or Salvia greatae is up on the side of the Orocopia Mountains. Based off of the observations we had all of the distribution of the plants were at the base of the mountains. So I was like, oh, okay. So you think they're up on the top. Interesting. So I started sourcing all these and putting them on a map. And so we have here, okay, hopefully everyone can see my mouse. But just for a little like geolocating, this right here is Dos Palmas Preserve, and we have the Salton Sea. Around here is all below sea level. And then this large wash here, I'm going to refer to it mostly as the Bradshaw Trail, but it divides the Orocopia Mountains here on the left from the Chocolate Mountains on the right. So it's also the boundary of the military installation. So we kind of weren't allowed to go southeast of this wash here. And so here are the Orocopia Mountains and a little bit of the Mecca Hills as well in here. So as you can see, a lot of the density of where, when I put all of the points and coordinates I had for this species on a map, a lot of them were found in this big wash here, some in these like mouth openings, a little bit peppered within the mountains, and then down here in Dos Palmas. And then this is Salt Creek. So it was also said to be found along Salt Creek. And this is sourced from 1915 to 2017. Of course, anything from the early 1900s is going to just have a brief note about the locality. So you kind of have to do a little bit of background sleuthing to figure out where exactly they collected that plant. I'll get into that a little bit more. Sort of my fun little natural history aside. But so I made this map. We also had areas on here that we were revisiting for surveys that had been done in the prior years as well. And those are the black dots here. So this is 2002. Oh wait, no. These are surveys that I implemented from 2019, and it includes 2002 to 2014 surveys as well. So these are the black dots are surveys that we at UCR have done. So when I say surveys, in some cases we went out there to confirm that the plant was there, but for the most part we installed these 30-meter, by install this, we put a stake in the ground and used a measuring tape to measure out 30 meters radius. And in that radius circle, we documented all plants that were within that area. So that gave us a density. When we came to a plant, so you can see here on the landscape, these are all Orocopia sage. I just put a little pin flag in them so I knew which ones I had already counted. I didn't go around in circles forever. And when we came to a plant, we measured the volume of it, so the size. We measured the health of it, and a lot of these plants were dormant. We had to conduct a lot of these surveys in the fall and winter. It's mostly logistic because of heat. Our springs are usually jam-packed with monitoring annual plants, so a shrub is on the landscape year-round. Unfortunately, for a shrub that goes dormant after the summer, it can be a little difficult, but it's not impossible to tell a dormant plant from a dead plant, right? Like there's still living tissue, and a dead plant is generally, you can see proportions of dead plants on these as being pretty much died back with no like lighter white twigs. And I'll show some photos of those too. But so we documented their health, the proportion of the plant that was alive, and as well as the age of the plant. And that was pretty much broken down by if it was a seedling, a juvenile, or an adult. These are pretty long-lived woody shrubs. A lot of desert shrubs are long-lived. So we didn't know exact health curve, but sort of where they were in their life stage. And then these sites that we visited, so we first started with revisiting our 2002 and 2014 locations. And these are again in the mid and lower elevations of this mountain range. And at all of these locations in the previous surveys, sage had been found. So this is sort of, this goes up in elevation. This is one of these really large bajadas. You can see that it's probably almost about a kilometer across at the mouth here. Yeah, so these large bajadas that are sort of this watershed from the mountain that flows down towards the Salton Sea. These lower elevations, and I forgot to describe, I'm sorry. We also walked a belt transect. This was just to sort of see if the sage was evenly distributed around the area and sort of what kind of microhabitats it preferred. I'm not going to talk about the belt transect that much. We did not find much sage in them, so we didn't have enough data to really do a lot of analyses. But that's what this 200-meter belt is for. Anyway. So in the lower elevations, when we revisited them, we were unable to find sage in these plots. And as we went up, we found 2 here, 0 here. So we did find a couple scattered, but most of them were pretty crispy. They were not doing super well. So the lower elevation plots in the field, we were already noticing we were not refinding populations that were found in 2002 and 2014. Up here at this is again still all fairly low elevation. We're still just in the mouth of these canyons for the mountain. But this is at the very top of this canyon. And so what we have is a little less exposure. These are south-facing, like broad, flat bajadas, as you can sort of see here. There was some more like rocky crags that sort of protected like little corners, and we did find sage clinging on here. So this is a pretty crispy dormant sage plant here, and then it's peppered throughout this little knoll that's sort of situated right here in the middle of the bajada, where there's just a little bit less exposure, a little bit less south-facing, like blasted by the desert heat as it like rises up too from the desert floor. So that was heartening that as we went up, we started to find some more. And so then we started to take a look at this distribution again of plots that I put on the map. And so we're like, okay, so where else can we start installing surveys to try and understand if the sage is not, if it's starting to disappear at the lower elevations, what's happening to it at the higher elevations. And as we started to go up the steep slopes and canyons, which you'll remember was not really how the plant was described. The plant described as these broad washes and sandy bajadas, right? Or broad bajadas and sandy washes. But as we started to go up these steep, like slippery, rocky slopes, we did start finding more sage, and we started finding a lot of pretty vigorous, healthy sage, which was pretty exciting for us. so we're listening to Andy's tip, right? He said, I've been telling people for years, it's up there on the side of those slopes. And so this here is some sage, and it's dotted along this little gully, and same here. This is pretty high up. It's not quite near the peak, but it's one of the ridges, one of the ridges of the horizon of the range, and you can see there's this is Orocopia sage here, and there's a couple just dotted in here. And this is that same higher elevation plot, but looking down. So if you saw more of this photo, you would actually see the Salton Sea. So it's looking south and down this gully. And so you have Orocopia sage here, and it's just sort of dotted down in these gullies. This is pretty much it. You don't actually see it on most of these other slopes. It's pretty restricted. So even though we're finding it up there, we're finding it in very specific areas, like these gullies and these canyons. It's not just widespread across these slopes.
What is the aspect of that gully?
It's south facing. Yeah. It's sort of southwestish. But yeah, that's actually a really good point. I don't know if Zoom heard it, but the question is what the aspect of the gully was. And as you're walking along the ridge, right, you have the south side going down, looking at the Salton Sea. And then if you turn around, the north side, you're looking towards Joshua Tree National Park. And on the north side of the Orocopia Mountains, you do get some influence of the Mojave Desert. There's Mojave yucca, and spiny manodora and some other species that you don't usually see in the Colorado Sonoran Desert. And you don't find sage on the north aspects. You find it on the southern aspects, which is, I don't have an answer for that, but it definitely has a preference. So we're in the field doing these surveys, and we start to notice trends or anecdotal evidence with our anecdotal evidence in the field. So we started to ask ourselves, like, so how does elevation impact health? In the field, we're seeing that they look healthier the further you go up. And we are also seeing in the field that we're finding more vigorous populations. So we wanted to know if our data also backed that up and reflected that that's what we were finding. Because we did these 30-meter plots all the way up, these different elevation gradients. We were also theorizing, and this was something that Andy Sanders threw out too, that these Bahada and Wash populations, the ones that were described as the core habitat or the main way to describe this plant and what it prefers, could they be waifs of the higher elevation ones, right? Like, could they be the product of seeds being washed down in flooding? That's still part of a larger population, but to assume that this plant's entire habitat is a wash might not be fully true for the species history and the habitats it can inhabit. So we, in total, sampled 30 circular plots of those 30-meter radius plots. And of those 30, we found sage in 18 of them. And we counted a total of 296 live plants and 37 dead plants throughout those. Our lowest elevation plots that were south of the Coachella Canal in that Dos Palmas area that I pointed out, none of those had sage in them. And sage was absent from all of those. So like I said, we were finding in the field that the higher we went in elevation, the density increased. And when we looked at our data, we also found that our data backed that up as well. So here on the x-axis, we have elevation in meters. So it goes from 250 meters to over 1,000 meters in elevation. And on the y-axis, we have the probability that the plant will occur. So this is a predictive probability model. And so it's basically asking, if I go up in elevation, what does the health look like in the plant? So here in green, and this is the condition. This is the condition of the plant. So dead, self-explanatory. A low health condition is under 25% live. And so we got these numbers by estimating the number of live branches on each plant. And then high is over 75% alive. I don't need to go through all of these but so you see here plants that have a very high condition, so they're quite healthy, they're over 3/4 alive. The likelihood that you find one of those goes up in elevation, like when you go up in elevation. With dead plants, the likelihood of finding a dead plant is higher the lower your elevation. And that's the most significant difference here. And we tested this as well to show that it really was significant. And so you see a couple other fluctuations. Our high health drops down at higher, but that's likely because it's replaced with very high condition, right? So basically our data was backing up this idea that as you go up in elevation, you get healthier plants. This is another way of looking at this while also looking at population density. So how many plants were occurring within the plots. On the bottom here, we have elevation again. Each plot with sage in it is represented by one of these bars. The width is determined by how big the population is, right? So this was a very large, or how dense the plot was with sage. So this plot here had a lot of sage in it. These had very few. And black proportions are those very high or those very healthy plants, and white are dead. So you see, as you go up in elevation by your plot, you start to find a higher proportion of black and gray, which is healthy plants. And at the lower elevations, you have a higher proportion of dead plants. There is a little bit of an outlier here at 244 meters in elevation. And I will put a pin in that one, and we'll talk about it in a minute because that's a very interesting little group. And then there are other questions, right? So my other question was about how the habitat was described, about these washes versus these rugged slopes. So we were finding these healthy populations up at the top of the mountains where you had very rugged, slippery slopes, rough terrain, and not that deep, nice sand that you can, there's more water availability there. So we did find that based off of the habitat or terrain type that we found the plants in, there was a higher mean number of live plants on rugged slopes. So this sort of also backs up, you get the rugged slopes at the higher elevations, you have more live plants at higher elevations. Okay, so our conclusions from this. Sage populations are declining in the mid and lower elevations, and this is consistent with hotter and drier scenario of climate change. Although we need more research to sort of back up saying that they're dying because of climate change, right? But we can assume that hotter temperatures are creating more stress for these plants at these lower elevations. And then also, so what's happening with them going up in elevation, right? So I think we've all heard theories about what happens when an area heats up. You have animals moving up. So one question is that what we have going on in the Orocopia Mountains? Earlier, I mentioned that these mountains are extremely difficult to get into. So I wasn't quite wanting to jump to the conclusion that plants are moving up just because we found them in locations they had never been found on these high slopes before. I kind of was more interested in looking at this thing called an accessibility bias. So basically, there's a bias on where these plants have been collected based off of where it is easy for people to go. So my theory is that these plants have been here all along. We just weren't documenting them there. And so I kind of wanted to do a little bit more of some background sleuthing to figure out if I could back that theory up. Okay. So going back to the early 1900s with the stagecoach routes, which, as I said, this plant was described in Western Science in 1903. So it would have been described potentially by botanists traveling these stagecoach routes to Palm Springs, or collected then, or we know it was collected then. And so the route that people were taking was not where I-10 is now, which is up here above the Orocopia Mountains. Eagle Mountains is in Joshua Tree National Park. So this is the way we would go if we're heading to Arizona now. But the stagecoach route at the time cut down from the Salton Sea to Dos Palmas, and across where I described the Bradshaw Trail was, between the Chocolate Mountains and the Orocopia Mountains, through the Chuckwalla Bench, and then out to the Colorado River here. So this was the main travel route. So if I go back to this map here, you can see in current satellite imagery, this is the Bradshaw Trail here. And so that route would have cut to Dos Palmas, which at the time didn't have as much water as it has now. It was just a very small oasis, but it was a place where people could stay and get water. And then across through the Salton Sink here. So note that these are sort of these wash populations that occur here. And that would be where those populations are on this stagecoach route. So a little bit more to back that up. On the left is a publication of Zoe, the natural history journal where Orocopia sage was first described to Western science in 1906, as I said. And in the middle here is the collection, not the collection that was used to describe the plant, but a collection from the same plant. So it's the isotype collection for Orocopia sage. And it's noted that this was collected, quote, about 4 miles northeast of Dos Palmas. So that sort of places you anywhere 4 miles like east or northeast of Dos Palmas, places you in the foothills of the Orocopia Mountains. And so some other evidence to back up those sort of the presence. Oh, I'm also interested. So this is Dos Palmas here. And I'm also interested in, we have populations that we can no longer find down here below the Coachella Canal. And so going back to herbarium records and notes and how reliable they can be, right? The question is were they ever there or were they collected there and they're gone? So looking at these first descriptions of where the plant was collected, in 1922, Mary Spencer also collected from it says topotypic here, which means she collected from the same population as the plants that were used to describe the species. So again, trying to figure out where plants were in the early 1900s is the goal here. Sorry, it's kind of hot in here. And so she notes, in Arenosis prop Dos Palmas, so in sandy soils near Dos Palmas, Colorado Desert, Riverside County, 160 feet below sea level. I don't know how exact barometers are, but that definitely puts us somewhere in this range here of where it was collected, which is an area where we definitely do not find plants anymore, and is an area along the Bradshaw Trail. So this sort of backs up that plants did occur at these lower elevations at some point, and it backs up that they were first collected along this trail for this, where it was easily accessible by people at the time. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I said to put a pin in this population here, this sort of very vigorous, low elevation, but not super large, 244 meters. That group of plants is this guy here. So you can see the dark red circles indicate that the average sage in that population was pretty healthy. The plants were over 75% alive. And it's pretty far away from where we understand the range of this plant to be. So there was some older documentation of sage in the Mecca Hill. These are the Mecca Hills here. And there's older documentation of sage there, but without very specific localities. And in 2012, Duncan Bell with the California Botanic Garden did relocate these populations. So they're tucked in an area called the Grotto, sort of up in these little canyons. He relocated one population up in a canyon. And it's interesting because we do study another endemic plant, the Mecca aster, Xylorhiza cognata, that only occurs in the Mecca Hills. And we had spent a lot of time in these hills searching for Mecca aster, and we never saw sage. So it's one of these things where we're like, okay, so that's probably only where Duncan found it, but we needed to make sure. So we also went out to go find it. And we did find a lot of it, and we were able to, so Duncan's original points were just in here. So we were able to find, it's scattered a little bit around this ridge line here. But you'll notice that this little area just on satellite imagery is a slightly different texture, rock-wise than the surrounding area. The surrounding area is alluvial deposits and sedimentary stone. The Orocopia Mountains are primarily made of schist, Orocopia schist, and some alluvial deposits. So it's a pretty big difference. There's a lot of fault activity through there, as well as marine deposit or river deposits from the Colorado River. So it sort of leads us to ask, is sage only found in these mountains because does it have a specific relationship, not only with the aspect or the climate, but also with the geology? Okay, so here are the points again. Orocopia Mountains, populations that we surveyed in 2019, our little Mecca Hill population here. And if I put a geology map over that, this sort of grayish green color here is all Orocopia schist. And then we sort of have alluvial fans and deposits from these upper elevations. And that's generally where we're finding sage, right, in the Orocopia Mountains. And then over here, we have that sandstone that I described for the Mecca Hills. And then the lines here on the geology map usually indicate faulting. And we have our little Mecca population right there. So when we zoom into that, it's a little distorted with the projection because it's an old geology map, but that population occurs on this like really small outcrop of Orocopia schist that's uplifted from these faults. Yeah, so that was really satisfying to find. So you can see that again in here. And so that's sort of where we left our surveys in 2019 was, okay, it's here, cool. It's also healthy, interesting. And then documenting that elevation shift in health. So when we got another round, CBCC came to us 4 years later and was like, do you want to do it again? And I was like, of course I do. I wanted to not just revisit the plots 4 years later, but also explore a little bit more of these canyons so what I just sort of backtracked with looking at these historical records is that sage is in a lot of places that people just aren't documenting it right now. And so just the points we have on a map don't necessarily capture the entire range of this plant. And this little population here in the Mecca Hills sort of solidifies that, right? So I was curious if there's populations that connected these, what we would find if we went into the central portion of the Orocopias, and what we would find especially out here, because apparently this is schist as well, but there's no documentation out here either. So again, I took all of our historic records. I took all of those data mining things that I did in 2019. And I started to plan a trip, many trips into the mountains. So like I said, most of this is wilderness. Wilderness is indicated by green, so you can't drive in it. So green tracks are driving tracks, and then you park and hike into the mountains from there. So the Bradshaw Trail cuts down here. You can drive along the Coachella Canal. And there's, this is the Orocopia Trail, which is like cherry stemmed in wilderness that you can access the Mecca Hills and the Orocopia Mountains. Let's see here. Okay, so the turquoise circles indicate those original 2002 plots. Brown indicate the 2014 plots. And then 2019, which is all of the field research that informed the results I just presented. Those are these big purple dots. So everything I did after that in 2022 and 2023 is in pink. So we revisit a lot of these plots. We performed these 30-meter surveys to sort of add more change over time to these areas. And then we did exploratory searches. So these were not formal surveys. This was hiking and taking coordinates every time I found a single sage plant. And so we targeted areas that were in Orocopia schist, areas with not just south-facing aspect. We have some west here, but pretty much anywhere that I thought might be a good connector for this area here. As you can see, there's some canyons that we did like hike in that we did not find sage in. So those are the pink diamonds or individual sage plants that we found. And excitingly, this right here, as one might expect, is Orocopia Peak. So we found sage there, not on the peak itself. This is a view from the peak, looking at the Salton Sea, but just below the peak, about I think about 20 meters in elevation below the peak, we found Orocopia sage. So that sort of backed up what Andy told me back in 2019 about where to look for it. And was pretty satisfying, right? So it sort of also just shows that the sage is all the way at the top of the mountain. I don't think it's at the peak. The peak is extremely windy most of the time. There was like a creosote bush and a couple of annuals up there, but not much else. So it's not surprising to me that it's not right there. And a surveyor marker. I had to take a photo of that to prove that we did go to the peak. My friend did this with me on my birthday, so that was a fun field day. And this is the results from those figures that I showed are published in Madroño. We published this in 2022. And also I have a background in illustration, and I got to also publish an illustration of the plant, which was very special to me. So yeah, this is available online, or you can email me. My email will be listed at the end as well, if you would like to read it. So some findings other than adding to more points on the map of where this plant is. Some other things we found in 2022, we found seedlings, which in 2019, that was sort of on the back of some pretty rough drought years. 2022, we had some good late summer, fall, and winter rain. So when we were surveying in January, this was January 2023, so 2022, 2023 surveys, we did start to see seedlings, which we had not seen in 2019. Oh, another note I forgot to include about, we were looking for juvenile plants, so young plants, and we found some at the higher elevations, none at the lower, and then that Mecca Hills population had quite a few juveniles in it, which was also exciting to see. But no seedlings in 2019. So in 2022, when we found these little teeny tiny sages, that was pretty exciting as well. And you can see the plants are quite a bit greener in the 2022 survey census as well. And then in 2025, I found an even bigger curiosity with the range of this plant. So again, here is sort of the results of all of the searches that I did. These are my findings. So there's a lot more points that other people also have found of this plant since then. These are the Mecca Hills ones. These are the ones throughout the Orocopia Mountains. And then in 2025, I was out in these mountains doing something not unrelated, but we were doing vegetation mapping. So looking at overall vegetation community. And we camped out there. And in the morning, I went on a little walk to this boulder pile, and I found sage on it, which is a little absurd. So this is this location here. It's way outside of where we would expect to find it, or maybe where we would think to search for it, which is possibly also a bias in our own searching, right? So when we did find it, it was pretty crispy. I would still like to go out and find it and see how they are doing. There was 4 plants scattered around here. This also, to me, this rock pile, I'm not the most seasoned geologist, but this is less Orocopia schist and a little bit more Monzo granite seeming to me. So that was pretty interesting as well to find it on a different rock type than I'm used to seeing it on.
I didn't hear the type.
It's like a granite. It's more granitic, like Monzo granite, like what you find in Joshua Tree. The plant community there was also really interesting. There was Mojave yucca and Nolina, and then some other Sonoran desert species that you would expect to see. So I would love to also see if there's one road you can take that cuts through here. We've driven through that and not seen sage, and we've hiked some of these canyons in here and not seen it. So I am curious if there's some more areas tucked in here that could connect these populations as well. And so ongoing things, I'm always looking for other people finding sage. If I can't get out there, I'm watching your observations of sage. So I have that tagged on iNaturalist. I will probably see it if you post it. Other people are faster than me on this app, so I might not be the one to verify it, but I will see it. and I will add it to my database. So ongoing research. In the last year, couple of years, we started to try and build some species distribution models to predict how sage will respond under changing climate scenarios, right? Preliminary models show almost no viable habitat for sage by 2100. So it's pretty bleak. I'm not presenting the models here because I think they need a lot of refinement. I think a lot of that refinement comes from a lot of unknowns that we have about this plant. We still don't really fully understand its biotic and abiotic relationships. We don't understand what it requires in its habitat as far as geology. We have some theories. I have, my observations, but I think that these models could be made a lot stronger with that information. But it is to say that this area is going to be rapidly heating up in the next 100 years, and these precarious species might not have the best shot at it. So our future goals are to figure out how we can build that resilience in that species. There's currently seed banking efforts by the California Botanic Garden and Mojave Desert Land Trust. So the species is banked by both of those organizations. But that's such like a last resort, right? I don't know of anyone who successfully germinated Orocopia sage or kept it alive. So sort of understanding more of the life history of the plant and its pollinators and what it needs to thrive will definitely help build that resilience as well. Of course, I would love to see either myself or future folks at CCB continue to revisit these long-term monitoring plots and sort of track the change over time with these populations. As far as protections go, about 95% of Orocopia sage habitat is included under the Chuckwalla National Monument designation. So that not only prevents any kind of mining or development within its range, but it also brings back tribal stewardship to the land for this range as well. It was kind of exciting. We got Orocopia sage mentioned in the official proclamation document, which a friend actually brought that to my attention. I didn't even know that. But it sort of mentions the value of this area for the scientific research that's conducted in the Orocopia Mountains and Mecca Hills, as well as the value for the variety of habitats and species that occur there. So it's mentioned a couple times. Of course, there's as Arlie said there in the intro, CNPS and many organizations have been fighting to make sure that Chuckwalla and other new monuments maintain their designation status. But I will say, keep an eye out. There might be some more things that we need people to support and sign coming up soon. So protectchuckwalla.org is a great place to get updates. I'm sure also, Riverside San Bernardino chapter is great at sending out calls to action. So thank you guys. Here's the references from the research. Yeah, any questions? Oh, sorry, I just want to thank my co-authors, and this is my shout out also. I cannot get this work done without people coming and helping me in the field. We do have like me and another field biologist conduct a lot of this work, but a lot of times we're pulled onto other projects and I need volunteers. I'm not doing sage research now. I'm actually doing research on the native Palmaceae. So if you are interested in learning more, take down my email. It's just my name, melanie.davis@ucr.edu. Yeah, our research would not be where it's at if it wasn't for our volunteers. They're kind of the best. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Melanie. That was really interesting. And I love the way you went back and gave us a whole historical perspective on the distribution of Orocopia sage, and your observations and insight are really helpful for this species. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see if anybody has questions, if you, at least for the folks online, if you could just put those in the Q&A and I'll call those out to Melanie and she can answer your questions. And then after that, Arlie or Orchid will take, or Mel, I guess you'll take questions from the audience there. I just want to remind you, if you could, when we go to answering questions from the in-person audience, to just repeat the question before so that folks online can hear it. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, so I think maybe I have a question from Sue Shiganaga, but I think she's indicating that it's answered, but I'll read it out anyway, just for the benefit of everyone. She said, Melanie, I was wondering about the population in the Mecca Hills. It looks like that population is doing well. What type of habitat is that? Similar to the rocky dry of the other populations? I think you did answer that question, but if there's anything you want to add to that with regard to the Mecca Hills population.
Yeah, Sue was asking about the Mecca Hills population and sort of asking about the information I did present on the status of it. Thank you, Sue. Sue has observed that population a lot with me and continues to on iNaturalist. I see your iNaturalist observations several times a year. I feel like you visit those, so thank you for doing that. Yeah, that's the population that we are finding recruitment. We're finding juvenile plants there, and yeah, I also think that one is very interesting. It doesn't have the same south-facing exposure that a lot of the Orocopia mountain populations have. It's tucked into these really shady canyons. And so I do think that when we visit these populations, the plants are a lot healthier because they're not dying back as much, because they kind of have a little bit more of some microhabitat protection in these slightly deeper canyons out there. But our data is showing the Mecca population is doing well, but we were out there in February and we visited the plants and saw some flowering, so that was good. But yeah, I'm definitely curious to track those ones in the future as well. Thank you, Sue. Yeah, we have a question from the audience from Orchid.
So I know you can go to the Chocolate Mountains, but I wonder, is there Orocopia schist there?
Yeah, so the question is if there's Orocopia schist in the Chocolate Mountains. And I believe that, I haven't looked at a map recently, so I can't fully recall, but I do believe, so say Orocopia sage is found in the sort of northwest corner of the Chocolate Mountains, and I do think that there's at least like granitic rock there and schist. As far as I know, it hasn't been found deeper in the mountains. There's a pretty extensive vegetation mapping effort done by Jim Malusa there, and I don't think he documented it further in the mountains. But it's one of my career goals is to get in there. So if anyone knows anyone wants to get me an escort into the Chocolate Mountains, I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Melanie, I have another question online. That is, do you have any photos of the plant in its dormant stage?
Ooh, good question. The question was if I had photos of the plant in its dormant stage. I mostly, I like this iNaturalist page because it's a lot of also dormant plants and also flowers. These are some dormancy photos here. This is the new occurrence that we found in 2025. So you can see that they're retaining the leaves, at least for a while before they drop them. And you can see it, Orocopia sage has these very spiny, like actually spiny. I've gotten one under my skin before, the spines on the leaves. And so you can usually find remnants of those leaves on a dormant branch. Generally a desert shrub, when it's actually dead, you get a lot more of this really dark gray, almost burnt looking wood. And a dormant plant for Orocopia sage is still very light. It retains a lot of the sort of like peach fuzz, the tomentose hairs on it. And if you just very gently scratch it with your nail, you can tell that there's living tissue on it as well. But good question.
Great, thanks.
We have one in the audience.
Yep.
And the location where you found it growing on monzonite.
Uh-huh.
Was that monzonite? You said that was already, there was orthoclase close to there. Was the monzonite upslope or downslope from the orthoclase?
Well, this was that population here. And so this was sort of like more in these, so out in this area, so it's north of the mountains and it's more of this like large bench with these hills and outcroppings of what look like monzonite to me. You're more of a geologist than I am, Arch. I don't know. I'll have to take you out there and you can tell me what it is. But that's what it.
I was wondering, you know, thinking that somehow, part of this is the potassium feldspar.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Calcium place was made its way into monzonite.
Yeah, so this was pretty isolated. It was this isolated sort of outcropping on like a larger bench. And it wasn't really like directly downslope of the mountains. The question, sorry for those online, is about this outsider population that we found and if the geology type there and if it was sort of downslope of the schist or the monzonite. Thank you, Arch. Yeah, Arlie.
I would say consider having like a treasure hunt for the chapter, in the Orocopia sometime next year.
That would be fun. That for online, Arlie is proposing a treasure hunt for the chapters. We have a couple chapter presidents in here. What do you think, Arch? In the cooler, I would be down. So I still really would like to voucher this population so that we can have a specimen of it in the herbarium. I saw it when it was so crispy. It was just sort of, to me, wasn't worth collecting at that time. So I definitely have on the books a reason to go back out there. And we've been talking about wanting to do a Chuckwalla bench trip sometime. So I think we should keep talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure we can recruit people to come on and trip like that.
Yeah, I'm sure we can. Yeah.
Well, there's similar species of thorny sage that's are Salvia.
Yeah. The question is, are there similar species to like this salvia, like these thorny sages? So the closest relative in salvia to Salvia greatae is Salvia funaria, which is the Death Valley sage. And it looks very similar. It's just way fuzzier. The whole plant is almost like whitish green with how fuzzy it is. And the leaves in Orocopia sage, you have like 2 to 3 spines on each side of the leaf. And in Death Valley sage, you have 1 or 2. So it's a little less spiny. But the closest Death Valley sage is going to be like on the southern end of the Mojave Preserve. So I think about over 100 miles away. Yeah. Somebody will have to check me on the distance. It's off the top of my head. Cool.
Mel, I do have another online question from Sue Shiganaga. She says, it seems that there hasn't been a lot of searching for this plant. Obviously, you've done a lot of searching, but more widely. And it is endemic to the area you described. Is it possible that it exists in other areas with similar schist environment outside of its current location?
Yeah, the question was if there's a possibility that this plant occurs outside of this endemic range in a similar schist. Speaking about endemic things, Orocopia schist is endemic to the Orocopia Mountains. I never really thought of rock types as endemic, but they can be. There's been pretty extensive searches in desert mountains, but also there's new discoveries in desert mountains all the time. So I think, exploring new geology types. I think that's the incredible thing about iNaturalist is there's been some, people who love botany and love getting out there and looking at plants, documenting new extensions of species all the time. So I would be shocked, but very pleasantly shocked if somebody found it somewhere else. But no, there has not been any documentations of it. Yeah, I forgot. I was going to add something to that. Oh, the euphorbia. I mentioned Euphorbia yeageri or Orocopia mountain euphorbia, and that only occurs in the Orocopia mountains. And it also strangely occurs in a little patch in the near the Granite Mountains, near the Mojave Preserve. So that's one that's endemic to the Orocopia Mountains, but also occurs a little bit somewhere else. So there's some interesting like disjunct things across sort of the Eastern California deserts. But I don't know of Orocopia sage ever being found elsewhere. Thank you, Sue. Cool.
So.
Is that it online?
Are we?
Yeah, I don't have any other online questions right now.
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
well, let's just thank Melanie and.
Thank you, guys.
So, yeah, are you available for us to take you to lunch?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we'll be taking her to lunch. If anybody wants to join us, you know, you're welcome to. We just need to figure out where we're going. We pay for the speaker and everybody else pays their own. That is what flavor. What is it?
And
You got your laptop.
I did get my laptop, yeah, I just need to get my thumb drive before you go.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm letting, I was just doing, letting it go.
Okay. Oh, so do we need to stop the, so, Katie, did you stop the recording?
No, I haven't yet.
Okay, because we're done.
Yep.
So thank you very much. And everybody, thanks for attending. It was a really great presentation. So see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.